Welcome to the Mapping Inspirational Women podcast. Today I'm with a geographer. Welcome, Qiujie.
Thank you, Hermione. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Qiujie SHI. I am now a lecturer in human geography in University of Bristol, and I joined Bristol very recently last November. So before that, I was a postdoctoral researcher at University, and prior to that, I did my PhD in Oxford. And then prior to that, I did my master and undergraduate, both in geography at Peking University. So I would say I am quite transnational person. So I moved between China and the UK several times. So I'm so happy to be here to share my stories and thoughts about inspirational women geographers.
Thank you, Qiujie. So here is the starter question for you to begin with. How many languages do you speak or you're learning to speak?
Obviously, I can speak Mandarin and English. And I have to say that actually in China, there are many languages. So Mandarin is just one language. And I also speak local dialect, which is Hunan dialect. So I would say now I'm speaking three languages and another one that is Japanese, which I learned during my undergraduate study. However, having said that, because moved to the UK, it feels like I have to speak English more. That's why I stopped speaking in Japanese for like 3 or 4 years. So now I think my Japanese has become really, really intermediate. So in total, I would say I speak 4 languages.
Yeah, that's very interesting because I'm also learning to study a little bit of Japanese. I've been involved with a textbook analysis of the geography textbooks, and I noticed that there are actually a lot of hanzi in Japanese. So although I can't speak Japanese, sometimes I find it's not that difficult to understand something in Japanese.
Yeah, sure. Because also because I think Japan is relatively academically closed to the outside world, so it will be an advantage to speak Japanese to learn something about Japan. So that's also part of the kind of international research benefits as well.
Yeah, and even in my thesis, I talked about like from the very beginning, one education discipline or geography discipline they've been known in China was actually translation first from Japanese and then from other languages. Yeah,
Yes, yes.
so they're very close. And then we're moving to have our time travel today with Mapping Inspirational Women Geographers. So in your life, can you recall women geographers who have inspired you in entering this career and in your life?
Sure, of course. I think there are two women I would like to highlight. First and foremost is my mom. My mom is a teacher, so she's always a role model for me for being a teacher. And I learned from her in terms of how to educate. I mean, she's a long story short, she used to be a teacher for graduate students, but after retirement, she became a teacher for primary students. So even though the two groups are very different, she sort of thinking actually educating people is no matter what stages they are, is actually letting them how to learn, how to being curious about the world. So from my mom, I kind of having this kind of vague idea of what kind of like teacher should be is like, so that kind of inspired me to step into the education career. And that's first woman that really inspired me. And also because my mom is really supportive of me pursuing a PhD degree, because at that time when I applied for a PhD, I didn't know that I would receive scholarship in the end. And actually many people in my family, I mean extended family, thinking that for girls they shouldn't study to such a high level. The most important thing for them to do is to find a career and get married. However, my mom perhaps is the one of the only two people. The other is my father, of course. that's opposed this kind of stereotype of women in China. So she said, even though you might not get funding in the end, we still happy to support you to pursue a PhD degree, because he thinks that learning is very important for a person, regardless of what age you are. So um, so actually anything related to learning, she would support me to do that rather than just simply find a career and marry someone. So she's definitely the most important and most inspirational person for me. And her impact is long lasting because that also motivates me to keep curiosity, keep learning, even though I'm now not a student anymore. And I think this spirit is really, really important for any people in academic life. That's why we are being researchers and academics, because we have this kind of curiosity and a willingness to learn. So she's definitely the first person I would like to highlight. The second person is actually one of my colleagues now in Bristol. Her name is Susan Parnell, and she also has an international kind of mobility as well. She was born in South Africa. She was educated in South Africa, and then she moved to the UK into academic life. She has an impact on me, not simply because of her like international mobility as well as the achievements in academia, but also because she's quite unusual in terms of being a um, very strategic person, a person with a vision, which is usually considered to be an attribute of male. So she is really unusual in a way that actually she shows that women can also has a vision, can also manage people really well, can also thinking about the bigger pictures rather than little things. So I have learned enormously from her for the past 1 year regarding how to communicate my ideas more strategically with others, how to form a bigger picture and future direction of my academic life rather than really focusing on little things, which tends to be quite common among academics because they're working in a specific field for a long time. So she's the second inspirational woman that I would like to highlight.
It's really nice to know part of your personal life and part of your professional career at the moment. And then we're so lucky to also know about their stories as well. And now, would you tell us a little bit more about yourself? Like, what is your research? Like you said, you strategically talk about more ideas about the vision. But what is your vision?
Well, good question. I'm still kind of trying to figure out the vision,
Yeah.
but now I would describe myself as comparative urban researcher. So I tend to also, okay, I'm a comparative urban researcher who are really interested in using urban experience in China to challenge the Western-centric perspectives on urbanization and urban phenomena. And I would say I am also a structuralist in a way that I focus on the broader social, economical, political, ecological processes underlying the urban phenomenon. And I would also describe myself as a critical realist in a way that I think there are deeper mechanisms, deeper structures underpinning the phenomenon that we are seeing today. So, in this aspect, I think my topics are wide ranging and focusing on society, economy, ecology, all these kind of sort of things. But what combines them all together is a comparative perspective, structuralist approach, and the critical realist paradigm. So these are the kind of approaches I study urban phenomena in today's world. And I think that kind of this kind of research background and research expertise is related to my mobilities between China and the UK, because you can only see what is different between China and the Western theory once you move out of China, and once you talk to people in the UK which have certain understandings or biased understandings of China. So I think my current research is really related to my personal experiences as well as my training both in China and Oxford, which is really focusing culture and political geography.
Yeah, and it's really interesting when you talk about the critical realist, because that's what the ontology is behind my study as well. And more refer, how did you know about critical realism, and how do you see what is the key of it, especially for the audience who probably not very familiar with it?
Yeah, to be honest, I think every person has an ontology, epistemology when they doing their own research. The thing is that people may not really think of the terminology of the things they're doing. So I think my ontology, epistemology haven't been changed since I started doing research, but I started to think what terminology to describe all these kind of things when I was writing the final chapters of my PhD thesis. Because at that time, you have to write a dissertation chapter saying what is your methodology, what is your ontology. So I started to kind of look at the so-called Western philosophies about the theory of science. And then instead of being guided by this kind of terminologies, I'm trying to find the right word, right word for my practice of doing research. That is why I come across critical realism as a ontology and epistemology. So I think the most important thing in this strand is that they that strand really combines deep thinking and observations. So it's not really like positivism really considers about observations and linkages between observations and what is going on that we can observe, nor it is really concerned about cultural studies in terms of how things are constructed. We need to deconstruct all these kind of things. So I think critical realism is caring more about causal mechanisms. And these causal mechanisms, in turn, is embedded in the wider structure that we are situated in this kind of world. So I would say critical realism, the unique characteristic of this strand is the combination of real and critical, which is the name implies.
So I also use this in my study, right? I think what you've been talking about reminds me of one of the reasons I use it is I feel this is not either or, this is both and. And it's in my study, I particularly talk about sometimes it's the absence that it matters. But if you look at the other kind of ontologies, they usually only focus on one aspect, and I don't think it's what I want to look at. And I want to see about the multiple kind of realities. I want to know about different perspectives, and I understand they may be different, but that not mean one have to be right, the other have to be wrong. That's what I see from critical realism. And also quite curious, like you talk about geography and you say like what you're doing more about the comparative urban researcher. What draws you to more about urban research in geography?
Oh, I see. I think in that sense, it is really, well, two things. First of all, I think you cannot study a phenomenon unless you have experienced that phenomenon. So I was born in Changsha, the capital city of Hunan. So from very early on, I am a girl who grew up in cities. and who have real experience of that specific place. And to be honest, I think Changsha is quite a large city. So I think I myself is embodied with this kind of urban experiences,
Mhm.
which enables me to study urban, to be honest. Because I think that's the issue I always encounter with many people studying China. Because I personally, it's my perspective, I don't feel like you can really study China unless you live there
Mm.
for a long period of time. And I think that's also the idea advocated by comparative urbanism, is
Mm.
that you cannot study a place unless you have some experience in there,
Mm.
or you can speak the language of that specific place. Because some of this experience cannot be gained by simply reading literature, by simply reading articles.
Mm.
So, well, so that's the first reason why I started to study urban issues, because I think that's the only thing I can do. I didn't grow up in rural areas. I know nothing about not. I mean, I have no experience in living in rural areas. So sometimes, even though I feel like when I'm reading articles, I feel like I know rural areas in China. But when I really speak to someone who have grown up in rural areas in China, I come across the feeling that I really don't know that area.
Mm.
So my personal experience is the first and foremost thing that enable me to do urban studies, which I think is the only study I can do. That's the first reason. And the second reason is my master supervisor is an urban geographer.
Mm.
So I mean, he taught my year two undergraduate unit. And to be honest, that unit is my favorite unit in my whole undergraduate study. I think that also kind of resonates with my personal experience,
Yeah.
but not only because of my personal experience, but also because that professor taught this unit really, really well. So this combination of my own personal experience and the skill expertise of that specific professor, which then turns out to be my master supervisor, that turns my urban experience into a research interest. So that's why I come to study urban issues in my master and then in my PhD.
That's really interesting to see how you kind of like being reflective of your own lived experience and your professional studies and what's led you to this. It also makes me to relate to my study as well. Like when I was talking about my thesis, I'm studying Shanghai, I'm studying these particular teachers. It was actually also relevant to my experience there, and then notice, oh, this is something can be studied more. And then it developed into research interest with more literature and kind of conversations with more scholars and reading these literature, trying to use the literature, the theories, and it became a PhD project. Yeah, definitely like that. And another question about the present is like, what keeps you doing what you are doing at the moment? Like, I know there are people enter the career and they're like, oh, the dream has achieved. And then they notice this is not something they actually want to do. But you seem to be quite energetic and quite passionate at talking about what you're doing. What keeps you going?
Well, I feel like I'm the kind of person who enjoy anything I'm doing, to be honest,
That's good.
because I have this kind of ethos that actually, if you do things really seriously, um, you can always find some interesting part in it. Even bureaucracy, even doing really boring administration work, you can still find some interesting things in it, like how to improve the efficiency of the system, how to do things in a more effective way. That kind of thing is also interesting as well. So when I was in my master education, actually I managed the research project of my supervisor, and that's purely project management work. And to be honest, I enjoyed it a lot as well. So I would say it's not because I'm in academia that I'm energetic. It's because I think I have a belief in that everything, anything, including cleaning a room, including kind of cooking, has its own interesting part in it. The thing is that you need to have this kind of spirit of keeping things interesting that makes you do anything in a very positive way. So I would say, well, of course, academic life is independent, it's flexible, and you can choose what topic interests you the most. But I think the more important and fundamental reason is that I want to think things in a very positive way, to think everything has its challenging parts that you need to overcome, and after that you can have a kind of feeling of achievement in the end.
That's really cool. I really like this ethos of like find the interesting part and enjoy it.
Yeah, I think anything is like I told you, if like even clean the room, cooking. Someone can cook really well, someone can cook really badly. So it's like so that's why I do not discriminate any sector, any jobs, because I think anyone who does the job really well has done a great job. It's similar to academics. It's no matter what jobs you're doing, just doing well is really difficult.
And now we move a little bit to the futures. Like, what are in the possible futures? Are there any notes or words that you would like to share with others, either to the younger you or to young people who are entering the field of geography or academia, or anything they want to do well?
Yeah, that's a good question, because that's also a conversation I had a few weeks ago with a PhD student, because she's really anxious and she's really rushed into academic life, because she doesn't want to do a postdoc because she thinks that is insecure, unstable, and she really wants to find a permanent job that can secure her for her lifetime. And then I said, there's no security in contemporary world. You may think that is a permanent job. Given the current situation in the UK, many higher educations now are cutting off the jobs for permanent stuff as well. So there's no security in this world. So I think the most important thing is, as I said before, is to keep learning, keep improving, rather than trying to find some security in your career. Think more about how to improve yourself, how to learn new skills and new knowledges, because that is a fundamental thing that makes you flexible, adaptable to this very rapidly changing world. So if I have one suggestion to more junior scholars, I would say, don't be panic, don't be so short-sighted, think longer, think about how you can improve yourself rather than find that so-called good jobs. So I would say that's the most important thing.
I think it's definitely connects with what you before were talking about, having a vision of it, and then you can locate yourself in this vision, how you navigate to achieve this vision, instead of like, okay, I need a job. That's not enough to see in the changing world. This kind of so-called stable job may not be stable any longer.
Yeah, and to be fair, I am also open to going to industry in the future if my job has been cut off, to be honest. So I think, yeah. So I'm ready to make any changes. So just open mind to changes. And sometimes you think, well, that thing is really challenging, but when you really do it, it's not actually that challenging.
Thank you. And now we move to the questions left by previous guests. And the question you're interested in talking about is what Lina Sama asked us. For internationals in a different culture, what are the challenges you have faced?
I would say that definitely is some culture shock, and there is some cultural differences in it. And sometimes you might think, well, that person might not be very polite to me. However, I think it might just be cultural differences rather than being impolite or polite. So I think it's to change your mindset of thinking, again, thinking in a positive way of other people's behavior. So I would usually consider some awkward issues to be caused by cultural difference rather than by intentional behavior of others. So I would say try to understand other people's words and behavior is challenging, but if you can consider it in a positive way, it's not as challenging as it appears to be.
And another question is also related with the challenges. What are the challenges that you have faced but conquered, that you were able to thrive after experiencing them?
Well, I think it's related to the previous answer, is that I initially, when I first arrived in Bristol like 10 months ago, because being a staff is different from being a PhD student. Because PhD student, you only need to focus on your dissertation, to write papers, etc. But being a staff, you need to work with your colleagues. You need to really be embedded in the institution. So what I find really challenging, again, is to start this kind of networking, start this kind of socializing with my new environment, which is, and also because of the cultural difference, the cultural shock. Sometimes I don't know what to talk about. Sometimes I would sit there being silent, don't know what to say. How have I overcome it? I think again it's related to the second woman that gives me inspiration. I mean, all the topics are interrelated today.
Yes, that's very good. You see the verbal connections,
Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of person who are more passive, so I wouldn't actively to talk to others. I wouldn't actively to socialize with others. But she's always sending me these messages and sending me these invitations, saying that you should, you should talk to this person, come to this place, come to my place for coffee, shall we go for dinner sometime? So she always takes the initiative to help me socialize with others, and she is quite a sociable person, so I can learn how to do things properly in a culturally different setting to me by observing her behavior. So how I overcome this obstacle, I think two things. First of all, someone has helped me, has taken the initiative to help me out of this kind of situation. And secondly, by observing what my role model, I would say, by observing what she is doing. So I overcome this obstacle in these two ways.
Yes. Thank you very much about it. It's really nice to know that it's not just by yourself, it's also by the kind support from the women who have inspired you, have always or still be part of your kind of like everyday work and of this. It's really nice to hear of this. And can you think of one question for the future guests who's very likely to be a women geographer as well?
Okay, because from our previous conversation, I think you might likely to do this podcast in China. So I would like to ask something about connecting your own research and experience in China to the international research worldwide, because that's also something I'm trying to do. So how you can communicate your research more effectively and efficiently to the international audience without using Western-centric perspectives. So sometimes so sometimes we have to draw on these concepts. But sometimes I feel like if I draw on these concepts, it basically reinforces this Western dominance. So, and also similar to female researchers as well, it's like sometimes we have to draw on some like inspirations from the systematic problems. But when you do this kind of things, you kind of reinforce the system. But given the patriarchy system that we're living in, we cannot get rid of the system. So sometimes you have to use the system in order to achieve your ambition. But sometimes this kind of using the system reinforce the gender stereotype. So basically, how to navigate your how to challenge the system by working within the system.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I think this would be a really nice question to ask some scholar who's also navigating around using some terms to challenge system, but also not completely against it, because first, like you said, you still need to work with it and to see what's happening.
Yeah. That's really difficult. That's really difficult.
I think so.
Yeah.
Not easy. It's not easy, but I think the podcast today really helped me feel a bit more kind of like relaxed and feel like a bit more hopeful about what I want to do, because like you, I always try to find the positive parts of what is happening, and there are loads of changes we can do, but like you said, it's always good to learn something new and see how we can adapt to the unforeseeable futures of this. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Done?